Education has not always been about teachers, books, and chalk. Its origins date back over 2.5 million years. Let's have a closer look. In the Stone Age, for survival, vital skills were passed on through imitation. This was the first form of knowledge exchange. With the development of language, the Iron Age saw stories, poems, and deeds being passed down by tribal elders by word of mouth. Youngsters were encouraged to repeat these tales until perfect. Tests existed in the form of initiation rites, where strength and ability were assessed over time in trials that reflected real-life challenges. With the Romans arrived a literate culture in Britain. For the privileged few, knowledge could now be recorded on scrolls or wax tablets. In an effort to spread Christianity, cathedrals and monasteries were established around Britain. Both worked as centres of religion and education. Two types of schools were created: grammar schools, where pupils were taught Latin, and song schools, where they learned to sing for cathedral choirs. Later, a third type emerged called independent schools, that is, independent from the church. Two examples were Winchester and Eton colleges. These were seen as feeder schools for universities. Universities started developing in the 13th century at Oxford and Cambridge. All these institutions catered exclusively for wealthy pupils. A universal system of education was introduced by the educator Comenius in his book Didastica Magna.
I advocate a progressive system relating education to everyday life by emphasizing contact with the objects in the environment.
The expanding economy of the Industrial Revolution era meant a requirement for technical skills. A formal version of the learning by example tradition of the lower classes was introduced in the form of 7-year apprenticeships. The 19th century saw towns expanding rapidly to house a growing working class. Children roamed the streets when they weren't working in the factories or attending church. The majority of people still received no formal education. Church was still at the core of society and was responsible for 25% of the country's education. The Church of England set up the National Society, which aimed to educate working-class children requiring a school in every parish. With more children to be found loitering in unsanitary industrial towns, Joseph Lancaster sought to educate the largest number of children, possibly over 100 at a time, removing them from the streets. These ragged schools were tuition-free and existed in rented warehouses. Until this stage, children were mostly educated in churches, warehouses, or at home. But by mid-century, we saw a move to the first purpose-built schools for the masses. School design, however, focused on the look of the exterior rather than the interior layouts and involved pitched roofs, brick buttresses, a number of chimney stacks, and gable ends. School wasn't compulsory for children between 5 and 13 until 1870, when William Forster introduced the Elementary Education Act. It targeted the working class, emphasizing the use of the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. By the end of the century, a greater number of children were being educated, and to further increase this, elementary education later became free. With more people to be educated, more space was needed, and an architect, E.R. Robson, was appointed to aid the expansion of education. Teaching environments became the focus, and attention began to turn towards improving the internal classroom spaces with the purpose-built schools. During the Victorian period, classroom space was reduced to accommodate 50 students rather than hundreds. Inside these classrooms, students were taught in rows facing a blackboard at the front of the room. E.R. Robson wanted to change the school environment.
The existing Gothic forms of schools, with their narrow windows and dark interiors, are so totally unsuited to school work. I propose a school where classrooms relate plan width to height. These classrooms surround and open into a central space. This large, lofty space then becomes an envelope for air, providing adequate ventilation and light.
School classrooms' layout loosened up as health and environmental concerns were raised. George Willows, another architect, was a key figure in pioneering a move towards the layout of schools we recognise today.
Satisfying the learning requirements of a child whilst at the same time providing a well-ventilated, healthy environment is key to school design. My open-air approach requires a garden site where classrooms can be opened completely on one side. Schools will be comprised of a number of low-cost timber pavilions linked to each other by a series of consecutive corridors, rows of pillars, or open courtyards. There will be an emphasis on playgrounds and outdoor spaces.
Due to the First World War and financial constraints, his ideals took a while to implement. His designs were characterized by open outdoor corridors that link classrooms with generous full-height windows. His distinctive and influential plan forms allowed for improved cross-ventilation and natural lighting. This contributed towards the gradual ending of the deep plan of board schools and later of the formal symmetrical plan. Between 1918 and 1944, there was a move from a parallel system of all-age elementary schools for the working class with secondary schools for the predominantly middle class. These were replaced by progressive stages of nursery, primary, and secondary. Secondary education became compulsory to age 14 and the state became responsible. By the 1930s, Widow's open-air classroom design was being incorporated into primary schools. South-facing classrooms feature a series of folding doors with high opening windows. Corridors were often replaced by open-air walkways, greatly increasing cross-ventilation. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, the courtyard plan remained the most common design for both public and independent secondary schools. The quadrangular layouts encouraged single rows with outward-facing classrooms overlooking plain fields and circulation along its side. The entrance and communal spaces, such as the assembly hall, kitchens and library, were dispersed along the central axis. At the end of the Second World War, R.A. Butler was appointed President of the Board of Education.
I want a schooling system that will provide an education to all, a three-part system, and all 11-year-old pupils to take a test.
This tripartite system consisted of grammar schools, secondary modern, and secondary technical. Admissions to the grammar schools were based around the new 11+. The school leaving age was raised to 15 as the government believed pupils appreciated the value of education at this later stage. Following this, national exams called GCEs were introduced, catering for a broader range of subjects. Meanwhile, Ellen Wilkinson had been elected Minister of Education. She introduced free milk following failed attempts to provide free school meals.
I want a progressive education system with happier, less uniform learning environments.
Ellen and Butler wanted education for the masses, thus more schools were needed. It was Sir Johnson Marshall's job to provide these. He was appointed Chief Architect for the Ministry of Education. Stirrat had a couple of post-war problems. Firstly, the raw materials required to produce traditional buildings had been used funding the war effort. Secondly, he would soon be faced with a post-war baby boom, bringing a greater requirement for new school buildings. These factors acted as a catalyst for the new methods of construction. Stirrat was to lead a development team who devised 5 lightweight prefabricated and interchangeable systems. This directly led to the formation of the Consortium for Local Authority Special Programme, CLASP, adopting the new construction methods.
The steel frame shall be based on a 3-foot 4-inch grid, so classrooms can be 24-foot square, as stated by the government requirements.
On slender resources, CLASP and Stirrat were responsible for completing a new school every day in England between 1950 and 1970. These were described at the time as having a quality that was unimaginable before the war. Classroom layouts had moved towards a more progressive educational style as envisioned by Ellen Wilkinson. The new prefabricated buildings were bright and airy, with lightweight furniture providing flexible room layouts. 2 main types of plan developed. The first, heavily influenced by George Widow's pre-war plan, consisted of circulation feeding off classrooms permeable by light and air. The second had randomly dispersed classrooms adjoined by flexible workspaces. Both, however, have classrooms with large south-facing windows. Bridget Plowden, an educational reformist, produced a report advocating constructivist learning methods.
Students should generate knowledge and meaning from an interaction between their experiences, ideas, and environment. I believe in child-centered education and the child as an individual.
The Labour government under Harold Wilson introduced less academically challenging exams, called CSEs, was proposing to raise the school leaving age to 16. These factors, alongside the GCE exams, ensured more pupils would leave school with a qualification. An oil crisis and recession meant little investment in new school building. Employers blamed massive youth unemployment on a lack of a standard employable curriculum. Margaret Thatcher came to power, stopping the expansion of the comprehensive system whilst creating sixth form centres.
I want a marketplace where parents can choose schools for their children based on ability and school's performance. Successful schools will attract more students and funding. I will close badly performing schools.
Her successor, John Major, addressed the reduction in apprenticeships by aiding the creation of a national curriculum where employable skills could be taught. He helped standardise learning through national key stage exams, meaning students could be regularly evaluated. Over the last 200 years, we have seen a clear shift from vocational experience to theory-based classroom learning. We have gone from being taught in churches to purpose-built prefabricated schools, whilst introducing a compulsory age for education that has risen from 13 to 16. Most importantly, we have gone from having an education system catering for children from rich families to an education that is available and obligatory for all.